I work for EMBO, and indeed I'm going to explain a little bit this, this funny alphabet of letters in a moment. So for now, a little bit about EMBO. So EMBO is an organization of leading life scientists that promotes excellence in the life sciences in Europe and beyond. And we try to really help build a research environment where scientists can do the best work that they can. So we try to take a little bit away all these worries about funding and bureaucracy and really help science thrive. Here's an overview of our programs and activities. I'll go into that in a moment, but first a tiny little bit about history. So EMBO is actually the oldest of all the organizations. We were founded in 1964 by some molecular biologists in Europe who felt that molecular biology needed a boost. So they saw that people were moving to the US to do science, and they wanted to put something up against that. So they created this European Molecular Biology Organization, and at the time that the organization had two goals. One of them was to promote scientific training and exchange throughout Europe, and that's still what we do to this day. And then there was a second goal, which was they wanted something like CERN, but for molecular biology. So the second goal of EMBO when it was established was to build a European laboratory for the life sciences. And that was achieved in 1974 when EMBL was founded. In between those years, they realized that in order to achieve these goals, they needed money. So EMBO had an initial startup grant from the Volkswagen Foundation in Germany, but they needed a more sort of institutional, broader-based support. So in 1969, the European Molecular Biology Conference was created. And that's the body of our member states, which provides the main amount of funding for EMBO and our work. So we have at the moment 30 member states, very soon to be 31 once Latvia finalizes the ratification process. And once that's achieved, so we're hoping that by January 2024, all Latvian scientists will have full access to all our programs and activities. So EMBC funds our programs, but we also have another very important aspect in EMBO, which is our EMBO members. So EMBO is a slightly strange beast in that it's a membership organization, but it's also a science funder, and we have a publishing arm, which you'll hear about later from my colleague Jeva. But the EMBO membership is really what carries us through. So these are elected scientists. There are now over 2,000 of them in Europe, and above 150 associate members throughout the entire world. And these scientists are nominated and elected by their peers in an annual peer election. So we're also hoping that in one of the next membership elections, we can start welcoming Latvian EMBO members into the fold. So this is the 2023 membership cohort. Every year about 60 new members and about 10 new associate members join EMBO. And they are really the people who do all the work on our evaluation committees and who sit on the EMBO Council and direct the direction that EMBO's work is going in. So now to our programs and activities, which is, I guess, what you are all interested in today. Our sort of biggest program in terms of the amount of funding that we provide is the postdoctoral fellowship program. This is a program for people up to 2 years post-PhD, where they can get 2 years of funding to carry out a postdoc project in a different country. So international mobility is a prerequisite for the EMBO postdoctoral fellowships. And they're really, so what happens is that EMBO gives the grant to the receiving institution, to the host institution of the postdoctoral fellow, and then that institution gives the fellow a contract with full social benefits. I won't pretend that 2 years are enough to do a postdoc these days. But what we find is that usually the scientists are able to use the EMBO fellowship as a jumping board to go on to another grant or to find a position to support the rest of their postdoctoral work. We also have, and this is what Yannis was already referring to, the scientific exchange grants. They're short-term grants where you can go for up to 3 months, or in some cases even up to 6 months, to a lab somewhere else to learn something new and bring it back to your home lab. So this is something that's really interesting for example, PhD students or also for postdocs, but also we're open to applications from core facility staff. For example, if you want to go to a core facility somewhere else or to a lab somewhere else where they have instrumentation or they have a technique that you need in the home lab and you don't have it yet, you can learn it there and bring it back. So in that case, for the scientific exchange grants, we do have a requirement that you go back to your home lab for a few months afterwards to really implement that technique and that new knowledge also there. The scientific exchange grants have a relatively high success rate. So if it's a solid project and the reasoning behind it makes sense, then usually those grants will also be funded. Another program that we have is the EMBO Young Investigator Program. So the EMBO Young Investigator Network encompasses 3 sort of groups. We've got the EMBO Young Investigators, we've got installation grantees, and we've got global investigators. I won't talk too much about the installation grantees and the global investigators because these are only available to a subset of countries, but the Young Investigator Program will be open for applications from Latvian scientists as soon as the joining process is fully complete. And this is basically for young group leaders. It's a networking program. So this is a program where you don't get a lot of money, you get some money, but you get some really nice benefits. So it covers conference funding, it covers an annual Young Investigators meeting. They have sectoral meetings where they meet with, different, so we just had one, for example, on structural biology. It provides training, so you receive access to EMBO training courses on lab leadership, on project management, and not just for yourself, but also for your lab. So there's a Young Investigator PhD course that's aimed at the PhD students of the Young Investigator Lab. So this is a really interesting program that just provides that little bit extra for young group leaders sort of start into their group leader career. Another interesting program that we have is the Courses and Workshops program. So EMBO funds workshops that are sort of conferences on latest developments in the life sciences. We also fund practical courses that provide training on new techniques. And actually, I brought a bunch of EMBO events posters that are outside. If there are any left, you can pick them up and you can see all the range of events that we're funding this and next year. So these are interesting for both people who want to organize them and people who want to attend them, right? So you can apply for funding for your conference to organize it, and we provide travel grants, for example, to the organizers. But also, of course, if you're a scientist who wants to attend one of those workshops, one of those events, I'd really encourage you to have a look at our website or have a look at the event poster outside to see what's available and where you can go. We also, I sort of mentioned this earlier in the Young Investigator Program, we have a training arm. It's called EMBO Solutions, and they provide lab leadership courses that help people sort of start their career as a group leader. Again, you know, if you're a scientist, you're usually not trained in people management. And all of a sudden, you find yourself in the position where you need to lead a research group. So you've got students, you've got technicians, you've got all kinds of things that you need to manage that you didn't need to manage before when you were maybe a postdoc or a PhD student working on your science. So the lab leadership courses really help with that. We've got 2 flavors of those, one for advanced postdocs and one for young group leaders. And they cover things like communication, team development, conflict management, but also negotiation and project management, which are all things that start to become important once you start your own lab. We also have other research skills courses that we're constantly developing and expanding on things like research integrity, planning and writing papers, but also giving scientific presentations and the peer review process. And for those especially, we work a lot also drawing on the experience of our EMBO editors who help co-train those courses. And maybe Eva will say a little bit about that as well later in her presentation. So again, if you're interested in those, please go onto the website and look for them. You can see the next deadlines that are coming up, and there we have both online versions as well as in-person versions of those courses that you can sign up for. EMBO also does some work in the area of science policy. So basically what we do mostly is we analyze issues that are of interest in the policy space to life scientists to make their work easier, to make it easier to cope with a regulatory framework. And we do that through policy workshops, through papers that are published either as white papers in our website or in other scientific publications. And basically, at the moment, the policy work focuses on sort of 4 main areas. One is research integrity, to foster the responsible conduct of research. And in that context, EMBO provides fora on responsible research, where somebody from EMBO, our policy team, will come and provide information to institutes and institutes heads about good, responsible research practice. We also require research integrity training of all our grantees. So if you get an EMBO postdoc fellowship or if you become an EMBO young investigator, we ask you to take some training in research integrity that we provide to our grantees for free as part of the grant. We've also done a lot of work in the area of open science, and that's both on the sort of policy side, but also in the implementation side. So we've got a few projects like Source Data that really aims to make the data behind figures and the data behind scientific publications more easily discoverable. And we've got an early evidence base that's focused on making preprints, of which there are just so many out there that it becomes really difficult to sort of assimilate them and categorize them in a scientist's head. You can't possibly read through all of them, so our early evidence base tries and help with that. The policy program also has done a lot of work and is doing a lot of work on research assessment. We're a co-founder of the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, and we're a member of COARA, which is a group that works on research assessment at the European level. So we just co-founded a working group within COARA on referee credit that aims to really think about how we can value all the extra work that scientists put into refereeing papers or refereeing grant applications, how that can be valued more and how it can be incorporated into when scientists are being assessed, for example, for grants or for positions, to make sure that that chunk of time, that's quite a big chunk of time for a lot of scientists, is more recognized and more valued in the research assessment process. And last but not least, EMBO has been doing some work in the area, mostly up to now, of gender roles and women in science, but we're now starting to branch out into equity more widely, to look into how we can help make science a more equitable environment for people from all sorts of different backgrounds. I very briefly want to mention our global activities. So EMBO has cooperation agreements with currently 4 4.5 countries, I would say. So we work with India and Singapore, who are associate members of EMBC, and with Chile and Taiwan, where we have cooperation agreements. And scientists from these countries not only have access to our programs and activities, but also you, as researchers from Europe, will be able to use your grants to, for example, go to any of these countries. So if you want to, for example, apply for a scientific exchange grant to do research in Taiwan, you can. And I think that's something that's really interesting for the European research community as well. I said 4.5 countries because we've just signed a memorandum of cooperation with the Japan Science and Technology Agency, where some scientists funded by JST will shortly also be able to tap into our network. So that's something to watch out for, and that's coming up in the very near future. I will skip over these 2 slides and use them as a sort of segue into the next presentation, where my colleague Yeva, who is a senior editor at one of our journals, EMBO Journal, will talk about publishing with EMBO. But before I do that, I will open the floor for questions, if there are any. If you have very sort of detailed questions about one of our specific programs, you can ask them either now, but we'll also have breakout sessions later on where you can come and chat to me and ask if you're interested specifically in one of our programs. So thanks very much. And yeah, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.